There are moments in life when standing still feels safer than moving forward, not because you do not want to grow or change, but because the path ahead feels unclear, incomplete, or hidden in a way that makes each step feel uncertain. And in these moments, hesitation can feel like wisdom. You may tell yourself that you will move once you understand more, once you feel ready, once the next part of the journey becomes visible enough to trust. Yet love speaks gently here to remind you that clarity has never been the requirement for movement, and certainty has never been the foundation of trust. God does not ask you to see the whole path before you step forward, does not expect you to understand where everything is leading, does not demand that you feel confident before you move. Presence meets you exactly where you are, offering companionship rather than explanation. You may feel pressure to know what comes next, to anticipate outcomes, to make sure you are not making a mistake. And this pressure can quietly keep you frozen, waiting for a clarity that may never arrive in the way you expect. God does not reveal life all at once because trust is not built through information. It is built through relationship, through learning that you are not alone as you move forward step by step. You may worry that taking the next step without understanding everything will lead you into loss, regret, or pain, and these fears are not unreasonable. They are human. Yet God does not leave you to navigate them alone. Presence remains steady even when answers do not. Trusting the next step does not mean you ignore your fears. It means you do not let them decide your direction. You may have learned to equate safety with control, to believe that knowing protects you, that understanding prevents harm, and while awareness can be helpful, it can also become a barrier when it keeps you from living. God is not asking you to abandon wisdom, only to release the illusion that certainty is what keeps you safe. There is a gentleness in realizing that you are allowed to move forward without having everything figured out, that you are not irresponsible for stepping into what feels incomplete, that you are not failing because you cannot see beyond the next small movement. God walks with you in partial light, not waiting for the full picture to appear before offering guidance. You may look ahead and feel overwhelmed by the distance, by the unknown turns, by the weight of decisions you think you must make all at once. But God does not give you the entire journey to carry, only the next step, the one within reach. Trusting the next step means narrowing your focus, not in avoidance, but in care, choosing to attend to what is immediately in front of you rather than exhausting yourself with possibilities. God is with you in this narrowing, offering reassurance that you are not falling behind by moving slowly, that you are not missing something essential by not planning everything in advance. You may feel impatient with yourself for not knowing more, for not feeling ready, yet readiness often comes through movement rather than before it. God does not ask you to become fearless, only willing to take a step without guarantees, willing to trust presence more than prediction. There is a quiet strength in allowing yourself to move without certainty, in accepting that understanding will come later, shaped by experience rather than anticipation. You may still question whether you are choosing correctly, whether this step is the right one, and these questions do not disqualify you from trust. They simply reflect your desire to be careful with your life. God honors this care, does not rush you, does not shame you for hesitating, but gently invites you to notice that standing still also carries risk, that waiting indefinitely can slowly erode your sense of aliveness. Trusting the next step does not mean forcing yourself forward. It means listening for what feels possible rather than what feels perfect. God often guides through what is manageable, what is gentle, what does not overwhelm your capacity, rather than through grand clarity. You may notice a subtle pull rather than a clear instruction, a quiet openness rather than a confident decision, And this subtlety is not a lack of guidance. It is an invitation to trust differently. God is with you in the small movement, in the tentative yes, in the step taken with a trembling heart, and presence does not withdraw if you pause or adjust along the way. You are allowed to move slowly, to change direction, to learn as you go. Trust does not require perfection. You may fear that one wrong step will undo everything, but God does not build your life on fragility. Presence remains even when paths shift. Trusting the next step means believing that you are not abandoned between moments of clarity, that guidance does not disappear when certainty fades. God is not standing at the end of the path waiting to evaluate your choices. God is walking with you through each step, adapting, supporting, remaining close. You may not know where this step leads, but you know who walks with you, and this companionship is enough to begin. Even now, as you consider what lies just ahead, not the entire journey, just the next small movement, you are not required to be sure, only to be open. God's presence does not wait for you to feel ready. It meets you as you are, offering trust not as a demand, but as a gentle invitation to move, knowing that whatever unfolds, you will not face it alone. As you remain with the idea of the next step, you may notice how much gentler it feels when you stop trying to imagine the entire journey, when you allow your attention to rest only on what is close enough to touch, close enough to feel, close enough to take without strain. There is often a quiet relief in realizing that you are not being asked to solve your whole life tonight, not being asked to know who you will become or where everything will lead, only being invited to stay with what is immediately before you. God does not overwhelm you with the future, does not demand that you carry tomorrow while you are still living today. Presence meets you at your current capacity, honoring the limits of what you can hold. You may feel pressure to be decisive, to be certain, to move with confidence, yet God understands how trust grows best when it is not rushed, when it is allowed to form naturally through small, manageable movements rather than bold declarations. Trusting the next step often looks less like courage and more like permission. Permission to act without certainty, permission to move without clarity, permission to let understanding come later. You may be tempted to wait until fear disappears, until doubt quiets, until you feel ready in a way that seems complete, but readiness rarely arrives fully formed. It grows through movement, through discovering that you can take a step and still be held. God does not withdraw when you move slowly, does not become distant when you hesitate. Presence adapts to your pace, walking beside you rather than ahead of you. Staying with the step that is close enough means you are allowed to choose what does not overwhelm you, what does not exhaust you, what does not require you to stretch beyond your current strength. God does not equate faith with strain, does not measure trust by how much you can endure. Gentle movement is not a sign of weak belief, it is a sign of self-awareness. You may notice that when you focus only on the next step, your body softens slightly, your breath steadies, your thoughts become less urgent, and this softening is often where trust begins to take root. God is present in this softening, in the quiet sense that you are not being pushed, that nothing terrible will happen if you move at your own pace. You may still worry about making the wrong choice, about stepping in a direction that leads nowhere, yet God does not abandon you to the consequences of imperfect decisions. Presence remains even when paths change. Trusting the next step does not lock you into a future you cannot escape. It keeps you connected to the present where guidance is available. You are allowed to adjust, to pause, to turn back if needed. Trust is not a one-time leap. It is an ongoing relationship with movement and rest. God walks with you through each small decision, not evaluating, not judging, simply accompanying. You may feel more at ease when you realize that the next step does not have to be impressive, does not need to look purposeful from the outside. It only needs to be honest to what you can manage now. God honors honesty more than ambition. Presence responds to sincerity rather than performance. Staying with the step that is close enough also means releasing the belief that everything depends on this one movement, that you must get it right or everything will fall apart. God does not place the weight of your entire future on a single step. Life unfolds gradually, supported by grace rather than precision. You may notice a growing trust not because you understand more, but because you feel less alone, less responsible for carrying everything. God is not asking you to be brave in isolation. Courage here is shared, supported, accompanied. As you rest with this understanding, the next step may begin to feel less threatening, less urgent, less loaded with expectation. It becomes simply the next movement, neither sacred nor dangerous, just part of living. God is with you in this simplicity, offering steadiness rather than answers. You may still feel uncertainty, and that is allowed. Trust does not require the absence of fear, only the willingness to move gently alongside it. Even now, as you let the idea of the next step settle without forcing yourself to act, you are practicing trust in its most honest form, staying present, staying open, allowing guidance to unfold at a pace that does not overwhelm you. God remains with you here, not asking for more, not demanding faster movement, simply walking with you as you take the next step when you are ready, knowing that you do not need to see the whole path to be safely accompanied. There are times when uncertainty does not feel neutral or gentle, but heavy and threatening, as if every possible step carries the risk of loss, regret, or failure. And in these moments, fear can quietly convince you that staying still is the safest option. You may tell yourself that waiting is wisdom, that hesitation is maturity, that pausing protects you from making mistakes. And sometimes this is true, but there are also moments when fear disguises itself as patience, when uncertainty grows so loud that it paralyzes rather than guides. God sees the difference, not with judgment, but with understanding, because fear of moving forward often comes from having been hurt before, from having trusted and lost, from having stepped out only to feel unsupported or alone. When uncertainty makes you afraid to move, it is rarely because you lack faith. It is because you remember pain, and memory can make the unknown feel dangerous. God does not dismiss this fear, does not shame you for it, does not demand that you override it with belief. Presence meets you within it, acknowledging how real it feels in your body, in your breath, in the tension that settles when you think about what comes next. You may notice how uncertainty turns your thoughts inward, replaying possibilities, imagining outcomes, scanning for what could go wrong. And this mental activity can be exhausting, keeping you awake even when nothing is happening. God does not add pressure to this state, does not push you to decide faster, does not threaten consequences if you stay where you are for a while. Instead, God stays close, reminding you that fear does not mean you are unsafe. It means you are human. You may believe that trusting God should remove fear, that faith should make movement easy, but trust often exists alongside fear rather than replacing it. And God does not wait for fear to disappear before offering guidance. When uncertainty makes you afraid to move, it can feel as though the stakes are too high, as though one wrong step could undo everything you have built, and this belief can make every decision feel overwhelming. God gently loosens this pressure by reminding you that your life is not as fragile as fear suggests. That one imperfect step does not erase years of growth. That presence remains even when choices do not turn out as expected. You may fear that moving forward without clarity means abandoning safety, but God is not asking you to leap into danger, only to consider that staying frozen can also cost you, slowly, quietly, through the loss of momentum, of curiosity, of trust in yourself. God does not rush you past fear, but walks with you through it, helping you distinguish between fear that protects and fear that confines. There is a difference between listening to fear and obeying it completely, and God helps you learn this difference gently, without condemnation. You may feel ashamed of your fear, believing that you should be braver, stronger, more decisive, yet God does not see fear as weakness. God sees it as information, a signal that you need reassurance rather than pressure. When uncertainty makes you afraid to move, God does not shout instructions, does not demand courage, but offers steadiness, a sense that you are not facing the unknown alone. You may still feel unsure even with this reassurance, and that is allowed. Trust does not require certainty. It only requires enough safety to take one small step. God does not ask you to move quickly, only honestly, to notice what feels possible rather than what feels ideal. Fear often tells you that you must choose perfectly or not at all, but God releases you from this false choice, reminding you that learning happens through movement, not before it. You may still hesitate, still pause, still feel your heart tighten when you imagine moving forward, and God remains patient, not withdrawing love because you are afraid. There is no deadline for courage here, no expectation that you overcome fear immediately. God understands that trust grows slowly, especially when uncertainty has been paired with pain in the past. When you do take a step, even a small one, fear may not disappear, but something else often appears alongside it. A quiet sense of support, a feeling that you are not carrying the risk alone. God walks with you into uncertainty, not promising ease, but offering presence, which is often what fear needs most. You are allowed to acknowledge that you are scared, to admit that you do not know what comes next, to move gently rather than boldly. God does not equate trust with fearlessness. Trust here is simply the willingness to keep going despite not knowing, to allow movement without demanding guarantees. When uncertainty makes you afraid to move, remember that you are not being tested, you are being accompanied. God is not watching from a distance to see if you will succeed. God is beside you, adjusting pace, offering rest when needed, reminding you that even if you stumble, even if you choose imperfectly, you will not be abandoned. Fear does not disqualify you from moving forward, and uncertainty does not mean you are lost. It simply means you are on a path that requires trust one step at a time. Even now, as you sit with the fear of what you cannot see, you are not alone in it, you are held within it. And when you are ready, movement will come not from pressure, but from the quiet knowledge that you do not have to face the unknown by yourself. There is a quiet kind of movement that does not announce itself as progress, a way of stepping forward that feels almost like staying where you are, and this is often the way trust begins to grow when certainty is absent and fear still lingers in your body. You may imagine movement as something decisive, confident, and clear, believing that if you truly trusted God, you would feel ready, strong, and sure before taking action. Yet love meets you here to soften that expectation and remind you that most real movement happens gently, imperfectly, and without the confidence you think you need. Learning to move while you still feel unsure does not mean forcing yourself forward. It means allowing yourself to respond to what feels possible rather than what feels ideal. choosing steps that respect your current capacity instead of pushing beyond it. God does not require you to overcome uncertainty before moving. God walks with you inside it, understanding that trust grows through experience rather than anticipation. You may still feel doubt as you take a step, still feel your heart race, still question whether you are doing the right thing, and none of this cancels the trust that is quietly forming beneath the surface. Trust is not the absence of doubt. It is the decision to keep moving gently even when doubt is present. You may notice that when you allow yourself to move in this way without demanding certainty, something inside you relaxes slightly, because you are no longer asking yourself to be more confident than you are. God honors this honesty, this willingness to move without pretending, without performing faith in a way that feels unnatural. Learning to move gently also means releasing the belief that movement must always look productive or impressive, that it must lead somewhere obvious to be valid. Some steps simply help you learn what you can tolerate, what feels safe enough, what does not overwhelm you, and these steps matter even if they do not change your circumstances immediately. God is present in these small movements, guiding through sensation, through peace or discomfort, through subtle shifts rather than loud direction. You may fear that moving without certainty will lead you off course, but God does not abandon you when your path curves or slows. Presence adapts, stays close, continues to guide through relationship rather than control. Learning to move gently means trusting that you are allowed to learn as you go, that you are not expected to know everything before you begin, that mistakes do not disqualify you from care. God does not use your uncertainty against you, does not withhold guidance because you are unsure. God understands that trust is something you practice, not something you possess fully. You may still pause often, still need reassurance, still feel pulled between moving and staying still, and God remains patient, not measuring your progress by speed or confidence. Gentle movement allows your nervous system to adjust, to experience that stepping forward does not automatically lead to harm, that you can move and still be held. Over time, this experience becomes the foundation of trust, not because fear disappears, but because you learn that fear does not get the final say. God is with you in each tentative step, offering steadiness rather than certainty, companionship rather than answers. You are not failing because you move slowly. You are not behind because you hesitate. You are learning how to trust in a way that respects your history, your limits, and your humanity. Learning to move gently while you still feel unsure is an act of courage that does not demand bravery from you, only honesty. Even now, as you consider the next small movement, not the whole journey, just what feels manageable, you are already practicing trust, already responding to guidance, already walking with God in a way that does not require you to be fearless, only willing to take one step at a time, knowing that presence will remain with you through each gentle movement forward. There is a gentle shift that begins to happen when you stop asking yourself whether you are being guided and begin to notice that you are already moving, already responding, already adjusting in ways that do not feel dramatic enough to count as direction, yet carry you forward all the same. You may have believed that guidance would arrive as certainty, as a clear instruction, as a moment where doubt disappears and confidence takes its place. But guidance often works much more quietly, shaping your next step through subtle nudges, quiet preferences, and an increasing sense of what no longer fits rather than through loud answers. Trusting that guidance is already underway means releasing the expectation that you must feel sure in order to be led, and allowing yourself to notice how your life is already responding, even in uncertainty. God does not wait for you to feel confident before guiding you. Presence moves with you, shaping your path gently as you go. You may still feel unsure about where you are headed, still wish for clearer confirmation, still question whether you are interpreting things correctly, and none of this stops guidance from unfolding. God does not require perfect discernment, only openness, a willingness to stay attentive without becoming rigid. You may notice that certain options begin to feel heavier, more draining, while others feel lighter, not necessarily easier, but more aligned with what you can hold. And this difference is often guidance in its most honest form. Trusting guidance does not mean you never question yourself. It means you learn to listen beneath the noise of fear, to the quieter signals that emerge when you are not forcing yourself to decide too quickly. God often guides through what brings peace rather than certainty, through what allows your body to soften rather than tense, through what feels sustainable rather than impressive. You may have learned to doubt these signals, to dismiss them as unreliable because they do not come with guarantees. Yet God speaks gently, respecting your humanity rather than overriding it. Trusting that guidance is already underway also means accepting that you may not recognize it until later, that understanding often comes in hindsight rather than in the moment. You may look back and realize that what felt like wandering was actually a gradual redirection, that what felt like indecision was a necessary pause, that what felt like uncertainty was the space where trust learned to breathe. God is not frustrated by your pace, does not see your questions as obstacles, does not withdraw guidance because you hesitate. Presence remains steady, offering direction that adapts rather than demands. You may still fear that you are missing something important, that guidance is happening elsewhere while you stand still, but God does not hide direction from you as a test. Guidance unfolds in relationship, not as a reward for getting it right. Trusting that guidance is already underway allows you to release the pressure to constantly evaluate your progress, to stop checking whether you are aligned enough, faithful enough, or decisive enough. God does not require constant self-assessment. Presence is not fragile. It does not disappear when you doubt or second-guess yourself. You may notice that when you stop trying to control the outcome, your attention naturally shifts toward what feels right in the moment, what needs care now, what step feels possible rather than ideal. This shift is not avoidance, it is responsiveness, and God honors it deeply. Guidance often arrives through responsiveness rather than planning, through listening rather than predicting. You may still want assurance that everything will work out, that you are not making a mistake, that your trust will not lead to disappointment. And God does not dismiss this desire, but invites you to notice that guidance does not promise ease, it promises presence. You are not being led away from safety, you are being led with safety, even when the path feels unfamiliar. Trusting that guidance is already underway also means releasing the belief that you must feel inspired or motivated to be moving in the right direction. Many steps are taken simply because they are next, because they are necessary, because they are possible, and God is present in these ordinary movements just as much as in moments of clarity. You may feel ordinary as you move forward, unsure, unremarkable, still questioning, and guidance continues nonetheless. God does not reserve direction for moments of spiritual intensity. Guidance weaves itself into daily life, into choices that feel small, into adjustments that happen quietly. You may not always know why something feels right or wrong, but you can learn to trust these impressions gently, without turning them into rigid rules. God does not demand that you interpret everything correctly. Presence remains even when you misread a signal, even when you need to change course. Trusting guidance is not about never being wrong. It is about believing that you are not alone when you are uncertain. You may notice that as you trust this way, your fear begins to loosen slightly, not because you feel safer about the future, but because you feel less responsible for controlling it. God does not hand you a map and step back. God walks with you, adjusting, responding, supporting as the path unfolds. Guidance is not something you must earn. It is already happening because you are already accompanied. Even now, as you consider your next step, as you feel the weight of not knowing fully, you are not waiting for guidance to begin. It is already here, moving with you, shaping your direction gently, faithfully, without pressure, inviting you to trust not in certainty, but in the steady presence that walks beside you through every step you take. As you stay with this sense that guidance is already moving beneath the surface, you may begin to notice how trust often grows in ways you cannot track consciously, forming quietly while your attention is elsewhere, strengthening not through certainty but through repetition, through lived experience, through moments when you realize you were carried even though you did not know how. You may still wish you could see clearer evidence, something tangible to reassure you that you are not imagining this sense of being led. Yet trust rarely announces itself in ways that satisfy the mind's demand for proof. Instead, it settles gradually, like a familiarity that develops over time, not because everything goes smoothly, but because you discover again and again that you are not abandoned when things are unclear. God does not rush this process, does not push you toward confidence before you are ready, because trust that forms quietly is often more resilient than trust built on certainty. You may still question yourself, still wonder if you are reading things correctly, still fear that you are moving too slowly or not decisively enough. And none of this interrupts guidance. None of this stops God from walking with you. Trust growing beneath awareness means you are allowed to not feel different even as something inside you is changing. You are allowed to feel unsure even as trust takes root. You may not notice this growth until one day you respond differently to uncertainty than you once did, until hesitation feels less paralyzing, until fear no longer completely halts your movement. These changes are subtle, easy to overlook, yet they reflect a deepening relationship with presence rather than a sudden increase in confidence. God works patiently, shaping trust through experience rather than explanation, allowing you to learn safety not by avoiding uncertainty, but by living through it with support. You may still carry the belief that trust should feel peaceful or reassuring all the time, and when it does not, you may doubt whether it is real, but trust can exist alongside discomfort, alongside questions, alongside fear, and still be genuine. God does not define trust by how calm you feel, but by your willingness to stay engaged with life rather than withdrawing from it completely. Trust growing beneath awareness also means releasing the need to monitor your progress, to check constantly whether you are trusting enough, believing enough, moving correctly. This monitoring often keeps you tense, focused inward in ways that prevent rest. Yet God invites you to loosen this grip, to allow trust to form without supervision. You do not need to keep evaluating yourself to ensure you are being guided. Guidance does not require your constant attention to remain active. You may notice moments when you act before fear has time to take over, when you choose without overthinking, when you respond naturally rather than strategically, and these moments often reveal how much trust has already grown. God does not announce these shifts, does not highlight them for praise. They emerge naturally as part of living. Trust beneath awareness also allows you to move without demanding that every step feel meaningful, understanding that some movements are simply necessary, part of the rhythm of life rather than signs of destiny. You may still long for reassurance that everything will work out, that you are on the right path, and God does not dismiss this longing. but gently reminds you that trust is not about guaranteeing outcomes. It is about staying connected regardless of outcome. You are not being asked to trust a specific result, only to trust the presence that remains with you through each result. As this understanding settles, you may find yourself less focused on where you are going and more aware of how you are being held as you go. This shift does not make decisions disappear, but it makes them feel less threatening, less loaded with fear of finality. God does not treat your choices as irreversible tests. Presence remains flexible, responsive, able to meet you wherever you end up. Trust growing beneath awareness also means you are allowed to rest from trying to believe harder, to trust more, to be more faithful, because trust is not something you manufacture. It is something that forms naturally when you are consistently accompanied. You may still experience days when doubt feels louder, when fear resurfaces, when uncertainty presses in again. And these days do not erase what has been growing quietly. God does not withdraw trust when you struggle, does not reset your progress because you question yourself again. Trust is not fragile in this way. It deepens through return rather than perfection. You may not always recognize how far you have come, but God does, not as a measure of success, but as an understanding of how much you have carried and how gently you have learned to keep moving. Even now, as you sit with what feels unresolved, as you consider the next step without clarity, trust is not waiting to begin. It is already present, growing beneath awareness, shaped by presence rather than certainty. You are not late to this process. You are not failing at trust because it feels quiet. You are learning a form of trust that does not depend on answers, that does not need to be visible to be real. God remains with you in this quiet growth, patient and steady, allowing trust to deepen at its own pace, beneath your awareness, beneath your effort, beneath your fear, carrying you forward gently, one step at a time. There are moments when you realize that trust is growing, yet it feels painfully slow, slower than you hoped, slower than you prayed for, slower than the urgency inside you that wants relief, clarity, or resolution now rather than later. You may look at yourself and wonder why you are still hesitant, why fear still appears, why uncertainty still has a voice, even after all the effort you have made to believe, to surrender, to move forward. When trust feels slower than you want, impatience can quietly turn inward, becoming self-criticism, the belief that you should be further along by now, that you are failing at something everyone else seems to manage more easily. God meets you gently in this impatience, not correcting you harshly, not urging you to hurry, but reminding you that slow trust is not broken trust. It is careful trust, shaped by a history that has taught you to protect yourself. You may have learned that moving too quickly leads to pain, that believing too freely leads to disappointment, and these lessons do not disappear simply because you desire trust now. God does not shame you for carrying this history, does not demand that you override it with belief. Presence respects the pace your nervous system needs to feel safe again. When trust feels slow, it can feel as though you are stuck between wanting to move and being unable to, suspended in a space that feels uncomfortable and unresolved. Yet this space is often where the deepest healing happens, because it is where you learn that you are allowed to take your time. God does not experience your slowness as resistance. God experiences it as honesty. You may feel frustrated watching yourself hesitate again, pause again, question again, and this frustration can make you want to force yourself forward. But forcing trust often deepens fear rather than resolving it. God does not rush trust, because trust that is rushed does not last. It collapses under pressure, whereas trust that is allowed to grow slowly becomes resilient. able to hold uncertainty without breaking. You may compare your pace to others, noticing how easily they seem to move forward, how confidently they decide, and this comparison can make your own journey feel inadequate. Yet God does not compare your trust to anyone else's. Your pace is shaped by your experiences, your losses, your capacity, and none of these make you less worthy of guidance. When trust feels slow, it can feel as though you are wasting time, as though life is passing while you remain hesitant. But God does not see your slowness as wasted. God sees it as time spent learning safety, learning discernment, learning how to stay present rather than dissociate or rush. Trust does not grow in environments of pressure. It grows in environments of patience, and God provides this patience without limit. You may still wish things would move faster, still long for the relief that comes with certainty, and God does not dismiss this longing, but gently reminds you that relief gained too quickly often fades, while trust built slowly reshapes you more deeply. When trust feels slower than you want, you are not failing, you are listening to yourself, honoring your limits, allowing trust to form in a way that does not re-traumatize you. God does not need you to prove your faith through speed. Presence is not impressed by how quickly you move, it is concerned with how safely you are being carried. You may notice moments where trust flickers briefly, where you feel a small sense of peace or willingness, and then fades again, and this inconsistency can feel discouraging. But trust often grows in waves rather than lines, advancing, retreating, then returning with slightly more strength each time. God is with you in this rhythm, not alarmed by setbacks, not disappointed by pauses. Trust feels slow because it is learning to stay, not just appear. You are not behind in this process, you are exactly where trust needs you to be. As you remain in this space where trust grows slowly, you may begin to notice that what feels like stagnation is often quiet integration. The process of your mind, body, and spirit learning to move together rather than in conflict. In the past, you may have forced yourself forward mentally while your body lagged behind, or believed emotionally while fear remained stored physically, and this disconnection made trust fragile. God allows trust to grow slowly now because slow trust integrates, it brings alignment rather than performance. You may feel tired of waiting for yourself to catch up, tired of revisiting the same fears, tired of moving an inch at a time. Yet God does not grow tired of you, does not become impatient with your pace. Presence remains steady even when progress feels minimal. Trust that grows slowly teaches you something fast trust never could, that you are allowed to feel unsure and still be guided, that you are allowed to pause and still be moving, that you are allowed to rest and still be held. You may notice that while your external circumstances have not changed much, something internal has softened slightly, that fear does not grip as tightly, that uncertainty does not completely immobilize you anymore, and these subtle shifts are often signs that trust is deepening beneath awareness. God does not measure trust by how confident you feel, but by how connected you remain when confidence is absent. When trust feels slow, it often means it is becoming less reactive, less dependent on reassurance, more grounded in presence rather than outcome. You may still want proof that this slowness is worth it, that something is actually happening, and God gently invites you to notice how you respond differently now than you once did, how you recover more quickly from doubt, how you are able to stay present with uncertainty rather than fleeing from it. These changes are easy to dismiss because they are not dramatic, but they represent a trust that is becoming sustainable. God is not building a trust that collapses at the first sign of fear. God is building a trust that can coexist with fear without being controlled by it. You may still grieve the time you feel you have lost waiting, the opportunities you believe you missed by moving slowly, and this grief deserves gentleness, not correction. God does not minimize this grief, but offers comfort, reminding you that nothing essential has been lost, that your life is not behind schedule, that trust grown slowly often leads to paths you could not have accessed through force. When trust feels slower than you want, it is often because it is being rooted deeply rather than spread thinly. God is not interested in how quickly you arrive, but in how safely you travel. You are not being trained to trust perfectly, you are being invited to trust honestly. Even now, as you notice impatience, frustration, or weariness arise, you are not failing at trust, you are participating in it. Because trust includes staying present with what is difficult rather than escaping into urgency. God remains with you here, not urging you to speed up, not asking you to believe harder, simply walking with you as trust grows at a pace that honors your humanity. You do not need to rush yourself to meet an imagined standard. You do not need to hurry your healing to prove faith. Trust that takes time is not a weakness. It is a sign that something real is being formed. Even if trust feels slower than you want, it is moving, it is deepening, and it is being held by a presence that does not tire, does not withdraw, and does not measure your worth by your speed. You are allowed to take the time you need because God is not going anywhere, and trust that grows slowly is still trust, still enough, still leading you forward one gentle step at a time. There is a quiet wisdom that begins to emerge when you realize that life is not meant to be a continuous forward motion, not meant to be lived as a series of steps taken without pause, but as a rhythm where movement and rest belong together, each giving meaning to the other. You may have learned to think of rest as something you earn after progress, something you allow yourself only once you have moved far enough, decided clearly enough, trusted confidently enough. Yet God gently invites you to discover a different way, a way where rest is not the reward at the end of the journey, but the support that exists between each step. Learning to rest between steps means allowing yourself to stop without believing you have failed, to pause without assuming you are falling behind, to breathe without fearing that everything will stall if you do. You may notice how difficult this feels at first, how your body remains alert even when you are still, how your mind keeps scanning ahead, wondering what comes next, rehearsing possibilities, refusing to fully settle because it believes rest must wait until something is resolved. God meets you in this tension, not correcting you, not urging you to relax harder, but offering reassurance that nothing essential depends on your constant readiness. Resting between steps is not abandonment of your journey. It is how the journey becomes sustainable. You may feel guilt when you stop, a quiet voice suggesting that you should be doing more, deciding more, trusting more. Yet this guilt often comes from a belief that worth is tied to movement, that being still means being unproductive or unfaithful. God does not share this belief. Presence does not measure your life by momentum. It remains just as close when you pause as when you move. Learning to rest between steps also means accepting that not every moment of your life needs to feel purposeful or directed, that some moments exist simply to restore you, to allow integration, to let your nervous system catch up with the changes already happening beneath the surface. You may have been moving internally for a long time, processing, questioning, adjusting, even when nothing visible changed, and this internal movement requires rest just as much as physical action does. God understands this need, honors it, and does not rush you past it. You may fear that if you rest too long, you will lose momentum, forget what you were moving toward, or miss your chance. But rest does not erase direction. It clarifies it. When you allow yourself to rest, you give your body and spirit the space to settle, to release tension, to reconnect with what feels true rather than urgent. Learning to rest between steps is also learning to trust that guidance does not disappear when you are still, that God does not go silent when you stop moving. Presence remains active even when you are not. You may notice that some of your clearest insights arrive not while you are pushing forward, but while you are resting, while your mind is less busy, while your body feels supported enough to listen. God often speaks most gently in these spaces, not with instructions, but with reassurance, a sense that you are safe where you are, that you do not need to hurry. You may still feel the pull to plan, to anticipate, to prepare for what comes next, and these impulses do not vanish overnight, but you can learn to hold them lightly, to acknowledge them without letting them dominate your rest. God does not ask you to stop caring about your life, only to stop carrying it all at once. Resting between steps allows you to carry your life in smaller pieces, to meet it moment by moment rather than all at once. You may discover that when you rest this way, fear softens slightly, not because the future becomes clearer, but because the present becomes more bearable. God is with you in this bearableness, in the simple act of being here without trying to move ahead. Learning to rest between steps also teaches you that trust does not require constant action, that belief can exist quietly, without effort, without proof. You may notice that when you rest, your breath deepens naturally, your shoulders lower, your thoughts slow, and these physical signs of settling are not insignificant. They are signals that your system is learning safety. God works through this safety, allowing trust to deepen without pressure. You are not wasting time when you rest, you are allowing what has already been planted to take root. Life does not unfold only through movement. It also unfolds through stillness, through moments where nothing is decided, nothing is solved, nothing is pushed forward. God does not treat these moments as empty. They are full of quiet care. Even if you do not know when the next step will come, you can trust that resting now does not delay it. It prepares you for it. You are allowed to stop between steps, to sit with what is unfinished, to let uncertainty exist without immediately responding to it. God remains with you here, not tapping a watch, not urging you onward, simply holding you in the truth that rest is part of trust, that stillness belongs in your journey, and that you do not have to keep moving to be safely guided. As you rest between steps, you are not stepping out of trust, you are stepping deeper into it, learning that you are held not only when you move forward, but also when you pause, breathe, and allow yourself to be exactly where you are. As you rest here, between what has already happened and what has not yet revealed itself, there is no need to reach forward, no need to prepare, no need to rehearse the next movement of your life, because the next step does not require your vigilance to arrive. You may notice how different it feels to allow yourself to remain in this space without anticipation, to let the future stay quiet for a while, to trust that movement will come naturally when rest has done its work. God is with you here, not asking you to decide, not urging you to act, simply reminding you that you do not have to summon trust through effort. It grows on its own when pressure is removed. The next step does not need to be imagined tonight. It does not need to be understood. It does not need to be planned. It will present itself gently, in a way that fits your capacity, when you are ready to meet it. You are not late for your life. You are not missing your moment. You are exactly where you need to be for trust to deepen without strain. God does not hurry what is becoming clear, does not rush what is still forming. Presence allows timing to unfold with kindness rather than urgency. You may feel a quiet reassurance settle in your body as you stop trying to predict what comes next, a sense that you can rest without falling behind, that nothing important is slipping away while you pause. This reassurance does not demand belief. It does not ask for agreement. It simply exists as an invitation to soften, to let your breath slow, to allow your thoughts to drift without needing resolution. God remains close even as your awareness fades, even as attention loosens, even as you release the need to hold your life together consciously. Trust does not require your constant participation. It continues quietly, faithfully, beneath awareness, beneath effort. You are allowed to sleep without answers, to rest without clarity, to exist without direction for a while, because the path does not disappear when you stop looking at it. God is not waiting for you to be ready in a perfect way. Readiness often arrives gently, through rest, through safety, through the simple experience of being held without demand. When the next step comes, it will not arrive as pressure. It will feel possible, manageable, close enough to take without fear overwhelming you. Until then, you are allowed to remain here, supported, accompanied, free from expectation. Nothing needs to be solved tonight. Nothing needs to be decided. Nothing needs to be proven. You can let tomorrow wait. You can let questions rest. You can let your body settle into stillness, knowing that guidance does not sleep, presence does not withdraw, and love does not grow impatient. God is with you now, just as surely as God will be with you when you move again. Trust does not end when you rest, it deepens. And as you allow yourself to drift, to soften, to be exactly where you are, you can trust this quiet truth to remain with you. The next step will come, gently, in its time, and you will not have to take it alone.